Hi, I'm Ann Toback, the CEO of the Workers Circle, and I want to welcome everyone to this event, to this program, this very special program tonight, where we're going to have a conversation with the worker organization CTUL. To begin, however, I want to introduce the co-host of this event, Jewish Currents. And in particular, I want to introduce Jacob Plittman, the publisher of Jewish Currents. So please join me in welcoming Jacob.
Thanks, Ann. And hi, everybody. I'm Jacob. The first thing I want to say is just I'm really honored that Jewish Currents could be a co-sponsor of this event. So a huge thank you to Workers Circle and of course to Satool. I followed your work, sort of from afar from quite a time, and I think the circumstances are obviously so, I don't even know what to say, so dire, so violent, and so disturbing. I think it's really amazing the role that Satool has taken on I think you can say on of national significance. So I want to say thanks for that, and thanks to the Workers Circle for pulling this together. Just for anybody on the call who doesn't know, Jewish Currents is a progressive Jewish magazine. It's actually 75 years old. It was founded in 1946. Some folks in the audience have been readers or on the board or all sorts of involved in many different ways. So hello to everybody who knows who I am. This is exactly the kind of conversation that Jewish Currents exists for. We're trying to build a Jewish conversation that reflects the reality, which is that most Jews in America are progressive, even if our public conversation doesn't always reflect that fact. And we also want to, as much as possible, bring the community, the Jewish community, into a conversation, a broader progressive conversation that's working very, very hard for a better country and a better world for everyone. So I think this conversation is a perfect example of what that looks like. So again, to everybody who pulled this together, to Worker Circle and Satool, thank you. I'm really honored to be here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jacob. And on behalf of the Workers Circle, I wanted to give you a little background. We too go a ways back. We were founded in 1900 by Eastern European immigrant workers who immediately collectively acted in support of the then nascent United States Union movement. And our organization was committed to fighting for worker rights, worker fairness, worker safety, and was very much a part of the early stages and ongoing activism around the US labor movement. Today, we're an organization that builds progressive Jewish identity through Jewish culture, through Yiddishkeit, education, and collective social justice activism. And we're proudly carrying forward our founders' commitment to worker rights, workplace safety, and fair pay. And today we're doing it in the 21st century through new activism and looking at new workers' models. And those new models are exemplified by Satool and Satool's workers who are on the ground creating a new movement for changing workplace power. So it's very exciting today to be amongst the innovators of Satool and joining our partners of Jewish Currents, who we've worked with for many years and who really share our values of a Shenera and Bessera Welt for Allah, or a better world for all. So thank you to Jewish Currents, and thank you to Satool for joining us. And now I want to introduce Noelle D'Amico, who's our Social Justice Director, who will be moderating this conversation. Welcome, Noelle.
Thanks, Ann, and good evening, everyone. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome Marfa, Malcolm, and Merle Payne from Centro de Trabajadores Unidos en la Lucha, or Satool. Based in Minneapolis, on the block where George Floyd was so brutally murdered by police, Satool has been building worker power and leadership in the Twin Cities for more than 10 years. A worker center that has won a voice for workers in the retail cleaning industry, earned sick and safe leave, and a $15 minimum wage through the Fight for 15, Satool has long recognized that one-off solutions are not the answer, as critical as these victories are. Satool is dedicated to building long-term solutions that ensure worker voice in shaping the decisions that impact our workplaces and our communities, and advocating for permanent institutions of power led by working communities of color that have the vision, capacity, and the stability to innovate and shape workplaces, communities, and politics. Tonight, the Worker Circle in Jewish Currents is honored to have Satool as our conversation partner in looking at models of building worker power and coalitions that will create solutions that address the underlying imbalance of power that structures both racial inequity and economic injustice. Amidst the devastation of the pandemic and with the power of the uprising in defense of Black lives, this political moment is ripe and requires of us our best thinking and deepest commitment, which is why we're so pleased to have all of you join tonight's program and hope it will catalyze your own work for justice. In the audience, we have union leaders, immigrant rights activists, leftist intellectuals, public policy experts, lawyers, students, social justice leaders, and so many more. And we want to hear from you tonight. We will be pausing 3 times during our program for Q&A. So as you have questions, please just write them right into the chat and I'll do my very best to include them. And now I'm delighted to introduce you to Satool board member Marfa Malcolm, who led the charge for Earned Sick and Safe Leave. Originally from Jamaica, Marfa works as a caregiver to the elderly. And Marfa is joined by Merle Payne, Satool's co-director. Marfa and Merle, welcome. At this time when Satool is pulled in so many different directions and addressing urgent needs in your own community, we truly appreciate that you've made the time to be with us tonight. So let's start by having you share a bit about why Satool was created. What was the problem? What were you seeing in the Twin Cities? And how did you start organizing for change?
You want to start first, Marfa? I think you're on mute.
I'm saying you go ahead, I'll follow you.
So I'll start and then pass it to Marfa. So Satoul began about 13 years ago in 2007. We were part of another organization called the Workers Interfaith Network at that time, and hired 2 organizers to be able to focus on leading deep leadership development among low-wage workers who don't have union representation, and focusing on that deep leadership development so that workers know their rights and are able to stand up for their rights. And Marfa was one of the earliest leaders who stepped up in the organization, who came in with her own fight around wage theft and issues that she's been facing in the workplace, and has been a powerful leader in fighting for change since then. And I'll pass it to you, Marfa, if you want to tell a little about your experience.
Good evening again. I'm Marfa, and I'm a member of Satool, and I presently sit on the board now, and part of the Workers' Rights Movement program. So it's all started, talking about it, it even got me still, after 7 years, I'm still emotional about the experience that I have with wage theft. So it all started in, I met this lady in a store, and she introduced me to herself, and we chit-chat, and then she told me that she had a contract where she cleaned 3 different buildings in the Twin City here, and if I wanted to come and clean with her, I gladly accept the offer because I was not working at the time. I went with her thinking I was going to help her to build her company, while likewise she helped me to earn some money for my daily, taking care of my rent, taking care of my kids. So I went with her and cleaned. When I was cleaning with her, 2 weeks passed, and she did not say nothing to me about my salary. I talked to her and I said, what about my pay? She said, oh, you know, it's like I pay on a monthly basis, so just wait until a month. Then I see a month pass, and she did not say nothing to me about my salary. So then I know that something is definitely wrong. So I said, you know what? I won't go back. So I did not go to work the next day. Then I did have some immigration issue, which I talked to her about. She called me. I called her first, and I tell her that I'm not going to come back because I noticed you're not paying me. She said to me, "Oh, if you don't come back, I'm gonna expose your immigration, that you're illegal here, and that you did not work for me, and all those things." So I was new in Minneapolis, in St. Paul, in Minneapolis that time. So and I came here just in the winter. So I could not find back the building that I was cleaning. So I was going around to find 3 of the buildings, but luckily I found one of the buildings that I was working, and I went inside, and I said, "This is the building," and I talked to a lady, and she told me that you're not the only one coming back to this building to with that lady, and because of her not paying other people, we have terminated her contract with us. So I was happy to hear that, and the lady was Merle's wife. So she gave me a card. So I should take it to. So I should call this number. They can help me. So then I call Satoul, and I tell them my story, and they talk to me, and they assign me with Merle, and then we took it to court, but I did not know what I know. What I know now, then I did not know it, because I did not have any proof to show that I was working there. I did not take any picture. I did not clock in. I just trusted her and went and worked with her. So that taught me a letter. So I know that what should I say now? Worker education is very important. It's very important for people to know their right in the workplace. And likewise, what should I say this now? Because talking about it still has me emotional because it has impacted me so much. I've nearly homeless, and my kids could not go to school because of that experience that I have with that wage theft from her. So just like me, there are some construction workers which are members of Satool. So they are going through the same experience that I'm going through. So how should I say it now? They say 1 out of 4 workers are cheated from their salary because of not being educated much about workers, wage theft and all those things. So what should I say now? Our goal at Satoul is to educate others, so that when things like this happened, the wage theft happened, they may know how to address it and how to come out of the situation. So that's my experience.
Thank you, Marfa. So just like Marfa, and as Marfa was saying, there's her experience is emblematic of a lot of workers who have faced wage theft and other issues in the workplace. And apologize, there's an alarm going on in my house that somebody's taking care of it. This is the fun of doing Zoom and videos from our homes. So our intention as we built the organization was to build a base of workers who knew about their rights and knew how to stand up and fight for their rights, and developing new leaders in the community who are leading fights to be able to change the root causes of exploitation in the workplaces. So you would have a lot of, in the early days, we would have a lot of one-off fights with employers to recover back wages. But our goal at that time was to build a base of workers who had an analysis about bigger systemic issues and why it could be that in an industry there would be so much wage theft. And so after some time of building a base of leaders, the workers decided that we wanted to start thinking more systemically about how to confront issues. And in the analysis of workers at that time, people said, like, we're doing good work, we're covering lots of wages, lots of new leaders, but at the end of the day, we're acting like firefighters, putting out fires, and after they've already been lit, and somewhere out there, there's a pyromaniac lighting those fires. Why don't we actually focus on stopping that pyro from lighting the fires in the first place? Like, let's get to the root causes of why wage theft could exist. And that's where we led a campaign with retail janitors, workers who clean stores like Target and Macy's and other big brand stores, and led a 7-year campaign that ultimately led to workers winning a union, and the first place anywhere in the country where contracted cleaning of stores in a metro area has gone union. That was one of the first big victories that workers had, and really not just a one-off victory around wages, but actually shifting the balance of power in the workplace, which is our bigger goal and where we're headed as an organization. And then we can pause there. That was kind of our original forming and what we did in the early days.
Thank you so much, Merle and Marfa. Shifting power into the hands of workers. And it's been critical in a number of different industries. You've not only worked at back wage collection, but also at policies that put power in the hands of workers, like the earned sick and safe time. And I was wondering, what really jumped out to me when you were talking about this was that model of co-enforcement. It's not just winning things, but it's how workers are involved in making sure that whether it's public policy or a code of conduct around cleaning by retailers, that workers' rights are really delivered. Could one of you say a little bit more about the co-enforcement model and how that works?
Marfa, do you want to tell about your experience in moving Earn Sick and Safe Time in St. Paul, and then I can tell a little bit more?
Okay. Okay. I was on the task force in St. Paul, and we were joined with like different people from different sectors, like small business, restaurant workers, restaurant bosses, and different type of people. So we how should I say it now? What was the question? But I don't know. Just explain about it, or
yeah, about how we won Earn Sick and Safe Time in St. Paul and the role that you played in that.
Yeah, I was on the task force. I was a member of the task force, so that's the role I played.
Mm-hmm. And so Martha was able to bring about her experiences and why there was a need for Earn Sick and Safe Time. And so as we have picked these fights to be able to win 15 in Minneapolis and in St. Paul and earn sick and safe time, we have always been clear coming to the table that of course $15 an hour is important, and of course earn sick and safe time is important, but the key to recognize is that just as easily as we can win a new law, and at the end of the day, a new law is it's a piece of paper that can be ripped up and taken away tomorrow by employers who have significant amount of power, right? We can win a new law that can be taken away. But when you focus on deep leadership development with workers, and you have new leaders in the community, that leadership can never be taken away. And so our focus is building structural changes that allow for the leadership of workers to understand and build their own power. So as we were moving for earn sick and safe time, as well as 15, our goal was to build out a co-enforcement model with the city of Minneapolis that would actually shift the balance of power in the workplace. So we very intentionally included pieces in there that that give workers a voice in the workplace. At heart, what we see, what it requires for workers to have a voice is that there needs to be real consequences for employers when there's violations of workers' rights. There's not consequences. Employers, like, they are going to play that cost benefit analysis and decide that they can make more money by thinking they can get away with violations. Secondly, there has to be worker education. Workers have to know their rights and be the front lines of defending their rights. So we were in the co-enforcement model, the city of Minneapolis has grants for outreach and education on workers' rights. And so we have funding then for us to be able to go out and educate workers about their rights under the city so that those workers can be the front lines of defending their rights. And thirdly, there needs to be a mechanism for dialogue with employers. So we created what's called the Workplace Advisory Committee in the city of Minneapolis that is made up of a third workers, a third employer representatives, and a third community representatives that can, in an ongoing basis, talk about problems that are happening in the workplace and what are ways that we can resolve those issues. And through this co-enforcement model, the goal is not to respond to violations after they've already happened. If they've already happened, that's a problem. The goal is to actually stop the violations from happening in the first place and empower workers to be able to defend their rights to prevent it from happening in the first place. And so that's what we've been doing when we are part of the fights around earn sick and safe time and $15 an hour.
That's really helpful, Merle. Thank you. I know that you're also part of the Worker-Driven Social Responsibility Network, which shares those core commitments about the education of workers, that workers not only need to know their rights, but be protected on the job, be able to report violations. So they become the frontline monitors of those rights, that there's real power that comes to bear when employers don't uphold these solutions. And I'm wondering, is there anything else you'd like to say at this time? I mean, with the pandemic, we certainly have challenges in the workplace. How is the co-enforcement model holding up at this time?
So with the pandemic, a lot of our members have lost work. As we did surveys during the pandemic, at least a third of our members said that they had lost all of their hours, and over 90% said that somebody in their family who was making money for the family had lost income. So there's both responding to how do people pay rent and how do people eat when you're losing your income, and pushing to create support networks for people who are falling through the cracks of the social safety networks. And secondly, out of all of the workers we've talked to who are working, we haven't talked to a single person who is getting the proper safety equipment to be safe in the workplace from unnecessary exposure to COVID. So then you see a reality where people are forced into the situation to make choices about, am I going to pay my rent? Am I going to buy diapers for my kids? Am I going to eat? Or am I going to go risk my life and the life of the people I love by going into a workplace that is unsafe, and forced into these impossible decisions? Martha, I don't know if you want to add anything about what you're seeing and what our members are seeing during COVID. I think you're on mute.
As you're saying, people are mostly crying about their rent. People are focusing. People have lost hours. Like for myself, when it happened, as a caregiver, I lost hours. So it affects me with paying my rent and other bills, because my clients have lost like three of my clients died. So it affects me personally, and talking to other people, it affects them also. So, and people are scared because people with aligned illness have to stay home because they are afraid of getting sick. So that caused them to stay home from. Yeah.
And I think like what we've seen is that during a pandemic, you cannot separate public health from workers' rights. They're completely inseparable. If employers are violating workers' rights and unnecessarily exposing them to COVID, that creates a public health crisis that can expose everybody to the pandemic. So we are pushing actually that the co-enforcement model is needed more than ever. To workers on the front lines are the experts in understanding how to deal with the public health crisis that's happening right now, because they work in their job every day. They know what they need to be safe and how to protect their clients more than anybody else does. And we need to take measures to put the power into the hands of workers to be able to advocate for public health.
That's a great transition, actually, to a question that we got from one of the attendees, from Tony, who writes, is there a grievance procedure available to an aggrieved employee? And if so, do the steps lead to an arbitration and a binding decision?
Yes.
So, go ahead, Martha.
Yes. Whenever we have a client that passed away, we always have a grieving session for them.
And under the co-enforcement model with the city, which I assume the question was about, is if there is a violation of minimum wage or wage theft, then the city can investigate and will investigate when a case is brought to them. And if they find that there has been a violation, in many cases, they will offer the employer the opportunity that, well, first you have to compensate the worker for the violation that happened. Second, there will be a severe penalty for the employer to ensure that this would never happen again, and that there has to be real consequences. But there's an offer that with those penalties, you can make a choice of paying the bigger penalty, or you can open the doors for all of the workers in the workplace to have an hour-long training about their rights in the workplace. That would be unpaid time. And many employers have chosen that hour-long training, and then Satoul is invited in to do a training with the workers to understand what their rights are. And we are always connecting with workers ahead of time to understand what is happening in that workplace. So an example was there was a McDonald's where this was where an earn sick and safe time violation was found, and the employer, as part of the penalty, the consequence was either paying a big fine or bringing in around the education of workers' rights. We knew from our members who were working there that workers were facing a lot of sexual harassment, and people were too afraid to stand up and say anything. It was so normalized that it just happened constantly. So then we tailored our workshop about talking about the right to work in a workplace free from sexual harassment. And then workers pulled us aside, and after the presentation, like, I never knew I had the right to stand up to my boss when he would do the things that he was doing. So it created that mechanism to, again, put the power in the hands of the workers who were on the front lines to defend their rights.
Thanks so much, Merle. We're getting some questions from participants about the protests and aftermath, and that's where I want to go next with you. At the end of May, George Floyd was brutally murdered by police a block away from your offices. And the Twin Cities galvanized in protests that catalyzed uprisings for Black lives across the country and around the world. And the nation began at long last to remember the many, many, many Black people who have been killed by white violence, by police, by vigilantes. And in the midst of this, there was a phrase, defund the police and invest in Black communities. And it became a widespread call. Now, Satool has been involved for years with a coalition of groups in Minneapolis that have urged a reduction in the police budget and to take that money and invest it in Black communities. Can you tell us, both of you, a bit more about this moment for you? What are the challenges and possibilities ahead? And why does this work to defund and invest, why is that important for low-wage workers?
Marfa, do you, so Satoul is located at the corner where George Floyd was killed by the police at 38th in Chicago and Minneapolis. And we moved there about a little less than 4 years ago. And I wanted to pass to Marfa to talk a little bit about why we chose to move to that space and kind of the background of us being there. And then if you want to tell a little bit about what has happened since.
Okay, first Satool was at Franklin Avenue. So when we decided to move to Chicago Avenue, we were thinking about people from the workers there were living on that street, and it was a mixed race were living there, and it is easy access for the bus and business people it was an easy access to the building. So that was one of the main reasons they chose there. And could I talk about since the George Floyd thing? Do you want me to talk about that? Yes. Yeah. Since it's happening with George Floyd, I've been there, and I see where people are coming. That street has become a healing ground for people. So people have been coming there, laying out flowers. We cry together. We laugh together. It's like an healing ground for us there. And right now they're thinking about having 38th as a permanent memorial for the George Floyd, or to open it back to the public. So Mary will tell you more about that. But right now it's like an healing ground to people from all walks of life.
That's right. with the uprising that happened after the killing of George Floyd, what is miraculous, it's not miraculous, it is intentional what happened, but the power of what happened feels miraculous, right? That all of the destruction that happened in the uprising, 38th in Chicago, where the killing of George Floyd happened, there was not a single fire, not a single building was destroyed, and that place has become a sacred space that has been blocked off since the killing, and just a beautiful sacred space that people come to, and a healing space, like Martha has said. And it's also a space that has become the center of the movement around thinking about police violence in Black communities, and thinking about how do we, again, not just respond and do another protest every single time another Black person is killed by the police. How do we actually get to the root causes of the systemic racism that's causing this? So Satoul has been part of the movement, which is called broadly defunding the police. The idea is, more than anything, is we've been part of this movement for a couple of years now, that we have seen consistently that when the police ask for more funding, there's always money. When workers ask for basic defense of people's rights in the workplace, there's never any resources. When we talk about the needs of the community, they plead poverty. So we see that wage theft impacts significantly more people, and significantly more money is stolen because of wage theft than all of the combined property theft that is out there. Yet we see over 800 police officers in the city of Minneapolis. And then you see at that time 2 wage theft investigators. So it's like thinking about the priorities of where you're spending your money reflects your values. And when the city is investing that much resources and responding around property theft, and so little about things that are deeply impacting the community, like wage theft, that's a problem. So we've been part of this movement for a long time to talk about the root causes. Again, let's get to the reasons why a lot of this exists in our communities, and let's start investing in Black communities and investing in the broader community to get to the root causes of what's happening here.
So it really mirrors, again, the prevention approach, the idea of putting power in the hands of workers and the communities so that you don't have these gross inequities and the horrifying problems and violence that come from them, but rather to put the resources necessary into communities. I know you've been working with others on this coalition for a while and engaging the budget. And you just mentioned how important it is that wage theft affects so very many people, and yet we put all this money around policing for public building. We know also it's been a time when the particular spot where George Floyd was murdered has been preserved, but the surrounding community has also experienced hardship with the loss of, small businesses and supermarkets. And I know Satool's been there with partners in the community working on how do you respond, how do you rebuild, so how are you meeting the needs? And I know we've got some photos that you sent along. Let us know when you'd like those to come up to give people a sense of what the neighborhood is like.
Sure. I appreciate your bringing up the photos if we forgot about them. We could put them up now as we're talking a little bit about rebuilding. And Martha, I don't know if you want to tell a little bit about our strategic planning process, kind of working backwards and then coming up to the moment about the rebuild, or do you want me to tell about the strategic planning process?
Yeah, you go ahead and do that.
So after Satoul won, when the retail janitorial campaign, we took the time to go through a strategic planning process to think about what is next as an organization and where we want to head. And members felt like we were doing really good work again. But at the end of the day, retail janitorial work, it is a huge victory, right? If you look at the beginning of the campaign in 2010, workers were making minimum wage, which at that time, I think was $7.25 an hour. And every single company had some form of wage theft, that they were stealing wages out of workers' pockets. That workload had nearly doubled in the industry. So with a victory, after the 7-year fight, workers won. Now workers are making a starting wage of $12.50 an hour. So moving from $7.25 to $12.50 an hour, that's an extra more or less $10,000 a year in the pockets of working communities. That's huge. At the same time, $12.50 an hour is still poverty level wages. So while it is a huge, important victory, we recognize that if it takes a 7-year fight to be able to win what is still poverty wages for a group of 500 workers, our members said it feels like we're dropping a pebble in an ocean of a problem. And we need to dig deeper and to really be able to create the big systemic change we need. And people decided to focus then on how do we not just focus on individual fights in one workplace or just an industry, but how do we get to the 0.1% who drive the economy of the state of Minnesota? And how do we create a space where workers sit at the table with the 0.1% so that workers can decide how the economy works for everybody? So this is our vision now of where we are organizing. And as an example of what that means, we have 2 active campaigns. One of them was with construction workers. As Martha mentioned, construction workers who work in non-union sector of construction say that it's a given that 1 out of every 4 jobs is not going to pay me. It's like, where else can you imagine that it's okay to get 75% of your wages? That is a norm, right? And then we're uncovering cases of labor trafficking in the industry. It's really horrific abuses. But with the construction campaign, we are focusing a fight together with the Worker-Driven Social Responsibility Network, WSR, that would get to the root causes and would put the power in the hands of workers and then industry and really hold those at the top of the chain accountable. But more than just responding as an industry, we're looking at what is the finance behind development? What are the motivations of development in our city? And it is a much more fundamental question, not about how things get built and the workers' rights for the construction workers, but what gets to be built for the benefit of whom? And how do we actually build a model of development that is for and by the community, that has good working conditions, that has affordable housing, that is treating the environment right, that is fighting against systemic racism in our communities, that is fighting against the patriarchy that is causing ongoing problems in our communities. So a much broader view. And this is why now at this moment, when we're at a moment of rebuilding, this provides the perfect opportunity for us to step in and say, there needs to be a different model of development. And this can't be driven by corporate interests that are going to suck the wealth out of our communities and replicate the same systemic issues that cause the uprising. We have to create a new model in this rebuilding. And that's where we are digging in and building a coalition and fighting about how do we create a new model that development is based for and by the community.
So basically the title of the program rebuilding, but not replicating the same structures of power that got us into trouble in the first place. And, you know, I'm thinking it might help to give people a sense of place, to see some of those photos. Can we start those while you talk a little bit more about how your organizing has changed at this moment, the new steps you're taking with the coalition to rebuild? Let's put those up. And you can keep going.
Yes, thank you. Martha, do you want to tell more about what we're doing recently, or tell a little bit about the pictures that are here?
Okay. This one that is up, it's this was the one that the wow. These are $15 per hour. This is the building, and this is one of our victory, and it is me at the June 9th. That's June 9th, and this is some of our mural on our building. It's on George Cloud. Yeah. And this is one of our long time. They're going so fast. Maybe this was after one of our victory. This one is one of our member. She's in the
Right. This was one of the other members of the board. Then behind her, you see a mural of her speaking when she was on strike during the movement for Fight for 15. She worked in fast food, and this was made out of a picture of her speaking on a flatbed with like thousands of people in front. So it's a mural, and then with her standing in front of it with her baby when she spoke with a reporter about her experience in the Fight for 15.
I just want to pause there because it's a good moment to ask a question that's come to us from people in attendance. They're asking, is Satool a recognized and certified union by the NLRB and able to appeal to that federal board? And it would be helpful, I think, you know, you were just mentioning Fight for 15, which was a union-led effort involving workers across the country, an effort that the Workers' Circle supported nationwide. But Satool is not a union. And can you say a little bit more about how you as an organization relate to unions and the organizing work that both are doing?
Yeah, so Satoul is a worker center and a nonprofit organization, and we consider ourselves part of the broader social justice movement. And our particular lane is around workers' rights. So we consider ourselves part of a much broader labor movement. But we're a nonprofit and a worker center, and the area where we step in is that what we have seen in the way the economy has shifted over the years is that as time passes and with the shifts in the economy, the people who actually hold, who dictate the terms and conditions of your labor more and more often are not your immediate employer. And there's multiple tiers of power between your employer, between you as a worker and the people who actually dictate the terms and conditions of your labor. I think the Coalition of Immokalee Workers is a very clear example for folks who know about that, of workers who are picking tomatoes in the fields of Florida. And at that time, early on, they were working for crew leaders, who were working for growers, who would then sell those tomatoes to large corporations like Walmart and Taco Bell. And they led a campaign where they held the top of the supply chain, where power actually really lied, that Taco Bell would buy so many tons of tomatoes that they could dictate the terms of, these are the exact types of tomatoes we want and the conditions we want them in. And that would lead to the consequence at the end of the the workers being squeezed on their wages. We saw the same thing in retail janitorial work. The immediate employers, the janitorial companies, really did not have the power, even if they wanted to give better wages and working conditions. They didn't have the leverage to do that because large companies like Target Corporation contracted out the cleaning, and they would do 3 tiers of competitive bidding for that contract and constantly drive the price down of that contract. So as that price goes down for how much they're paying for it, then the squeeze is put on the backs of the workers with workloads doubling and wages dropping. And you see that as, again, as a consequence, like in construction and the multiple tiers of power that exist, from the investors in development to the developers themselves that set the standard for what's going to happen on the ground. So as a worker center, what we focus on is deep leadership development with workers and really getting to the root causes of where does power actually lie at the top that is creating the terms and conditions of our labor, where the law has, employers and business interests have been able to manipulate the law to be unfavorable to unions, in the sense that a union by law is you're only allowed to go after your immediate employer to be able to get that contract. A worker center, we are not going to the immediate employer. We're not trying to negotiate terms and conditions of labor. We're not in a long-term relationship with that employer. We're actually going to the top where the power lies and saying you need to be held accountable for what's happening, for the consequences of your actions, and shifting an entire industry at the same time and moving terms and conditions for an entire industry from the top down and from deep leadership development of workers that lead that work. So we are part of a much broader movement. We are very supportive of unions, and we consider them some of our deepest partners in the fight for justice. We also see that unions have a place in the movement, and there's a place for other pieces of the movement to be able to build the rich soil of what it requires to win the victories that we need.
Thanks, Merle. We're getting another follow-up question. What support does Satool receive from established unions? And, you know, it put me in mind, I was thinking around Local 26, which is working right now with the retail cleaning contract, right? They secured that contract. So, can you say a little bit more about Satool's relationship with unions?
So we have partnerships with many different organizations. We work closely with the environmental justice movement. We work closely with unions. We work closely with Black Lives Matter. With a broad swath of the social movement networks. We work closely with unions and partnerships where we're looking at what's happening in different industries and understanding what's happening. There's some the funding that we get, the overwhelming majority, probably about 60% of the funding comes from foundations. Then another 25 to 30% comes from individual fundraising. And then there's a chunk in there, like 5 to 10% that comes from unions and other organizations that support our work.
I know that we're closing in on our time together, and I wanted to spend a moment with the Rebuild Coalition that you're a part of, and thinking with you about that. You know, the mayor of Minneapolis and definitely, you know, stepped in after the protests had paused and talked about rebuilding. And put some things on the table there with, I believe, some usual suspects in the community as well. How is Satool's work with the Rebuilding Coalition different from that? What are you doing in contrast? And what do you hope that you'll be able to achieve?
I can start, and Martha, if you want to add anything. But as we're thinking about the rebuild, what we saw is the mayor formed what he called a coalition very quickly that talked about rebuilding. And then as we actually looked at what is this coalition that he's building, it was made up of the Chamber of Commerce, the Downtown Council, the Lake Street Business Council, and another business council on the north side where some of the some businesses were impacted, and in St. Paul, but it was all business interests that were at the table. And what they were saying was all the right things. They were saying, we don't want this to lead to gentrification. We want to support small family and immigrant-owned businesses. But that is the same thing that these communities have heard for generation after generation after generation, that developers know how to say the right thing, but when it comes to their actions, those turn out very fundamentally different. So it's not about saying the right thing, it's about your actions. And when it is the same players that have generation after generation acted in their own interests, sucking wealth out of our communities, we can't believe that that is going to do something different, right? So we are building a coalition from the community with Black Visions Collective, with Reclaim the Blocks, with the neighborhood organizations in the Twin Cities, with the trade unions, with immigrant rights activists, with everybody who is impacted in the community by development, and that this would be a table that is going to fight for development to happen on our terms, on the terms of the impacted community.
I also know that you're working together as a coalition, but Satool has its eye on some of the building contracts, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're hoping to achieve with the rebuilding?
And do you want to tell any, Martha, about what are your thoughts about when we rebuild after the uprising, what needs to be prioritized?
I think they wanted to involve people give people in the community the contract to help build 30th Street in Chicago.
Yeah. I heard this example that was just maddening, utterly maddening to me, in the building of the stadium in the Twin Cities that used our tax dollars to build a brand new stadium, and we had a really nice stadium to begin with. And there, so in a positive thing, it sounded good. There were standards set that there needs to be a certain percentage of the workers who are people of color and from minority communities, so whether it's women or communities of color. And that sounded good, but then what ended up happening is there was so much money coming in for the stadium that they had all of the experienced labor, who were usually white workers, the experienced union labor are usually white men, doing the work, and then they hired women and people of color to sit on buckets all day and watch the work happen, because they didn't have the experience to be able to do the work. So then, yes, they got a job for the time that that construction was happening, but there wasn't an investment in the skill building of the community so that those workers would have a career and a good paying career, rather than just like a one-time off job. So that is like an example of what we are saying, is that this is not just about getting a one-time job for the workers in the rebuild. This is about investing in the skills of the community for long-term wealth building in the communities.
And being at that same table with those the would-be developers in the community, being there with the 1%, being there with the politicians, so that any solution that's developed is truly accountable. We're very grateful for your time tonight, and I want to give you the chance, both of you, Martha and Merle, to say any last remarks, any parting words that you would like us to hold as we leave this time together.
Go ahead, Merle, I'll come after.
I think just at the end of the day, again, our focus is on our focus is on two things that need to really get to the root causes of what's happening. It's one, deep leadership development. So workers know their rights and are able to lead the fights for their rights. And secondly, looking at the top and where does power actually really lie, and going to that power to hold them accountable to what's happening in our communities. And that at the end of the day, if we can build movements that do those two things, we are going to be able to see big, important changes. And this is the moment for us to step up, right? Like if people who have read what is the Naomi Klein book, is it Disaster Capitalism is the name, like the business interests are going to step into this moment and try to use it to continue moving their interests. This is also a moment for us as a movement to take the ideas that we've had for many years and be in the streets demanding that long-term systemic change. This is an opportunity to move things.
We are an organization of different culture. We have Spanish people, we have like me as an immigrant, and we have Americans. So my dream is to see we can have more leadership school so that we can learn more, so that we can know our rights and communicate with each other better.
Thank you both so much. On behalf of the Workers' Circle and Jewish Currents and all who've gathered with us tonight, thank you, Marfa, and thank you, Merle, for sharing your work, for igniting our imagination and providing stimulating models for us to take with us to catalyze change. And thank you, everyone out there in the audience, for your questions. The Workers' Circle and Jewish Currents hope that you'll join us for future programs and look